So we're going to look at the topic of internal training. Qigong is the Mandarin term. But as you might have guessed from the poster and the advertisements, I'm really going to target it at how to use these principles while you're giving treatments to other people, mainly so you don't wreck yourself. You know, so often I hear therapists, if they're massage therapists, they've just been like pressing all day or like cranking people or all the rest, and you know, they end up with all kinds of tendon issues, especially through the hands. More energetic therapists, people who are dealing with the psychology more or emotional landscape more, often tell me about how they've taken on the stuff from their patient. And I believe all of this stuff can be solved with good internal training. So we're going to look at the fundamental principles. I'm going to give you guys a few practices to take home and work with, but we'll also have a bit of an opportunity to get some people on beds and try and integrate the principles today, and I'll throw some suggestions out there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time first getting a bit of a framework, and I'm really using a Daoist framework for this because it's through that framework that I learned to do it in the first place. These days I hesitate to call myself Daoist. I'm not part of a tradition anymore anyway, but even the more research I've done into it, the more it's like very, very hazy what it actually refers to. So I'm leaving the term alone, but I'm definitely doing Qigong, which is a kind of training that's often found in Daoist systems. It's also often found in internal martial arts systems and various other, Qigong could be considered a type of Qigong as well. We want to start looking at yin and yang. Up here I've just got a basic spectrum, yin on one side, yang on the other. In the middle, where the humans live, yin and yang. Typically they talk about man between heaven and earth in the Daoist cosmology. Man would be here, earth here and heaven here. With yin referring to the more material aspect of the world, the more dense, finite part of the world, and yang referring to the immaterial part of the world, the more expanded, insubstantial part. Yin and yang is a very, very deep topic. We won't go too much into it today. It is difficult because it's not fixed. You can have yin and yang ideas switch depending on the context. I'll give a very, very simple example. If I take a ball sitting on the ground and I have the center of the ball and the point of contact with the ball, which one's yin and which one's yang? Well, relative to the ball itself, the center is more inward, and this, like here and here and here and here and here, is more outward. So this point would be yang and this point would be yin. Relative to the ball sitting on a surface, this point is closer to the center, this point is further away from the center. So this point would be yin and this point would be yang, so they're switched. So I can't just arbitrarily say that is the yin point. You need the context. Hey Tristan.
Hello. Apologies.
All good, all good. So yin and yang become really, really tricky because of that. It always depends on the context and what's being compared as to which thing becomes yin and which thing becomes yang. It's comparative. But for the purpose of today, yin is really going to refer to the when we're comparing mind and body to the body, because the body is more material and the mind is less material. And then we're going to look at a couple of spectrums here where we look at yin and yang together. Before we do that, we need to have a direct look at our reality, because this will really have an impact on what we do. We have no external senses. We only have internal perceptions. The external world we only know via our internal perceptions. So I only know that this is here, this whiteboard, which is apparently outside me, because I can see it, but my vision, the light bounces off this, hits the retina, gets flipped around, hits the back, gets turned into an electrical signal, gets sent to the brain, gets filled in a bunch of stuff, and then gets presented to the consciousness. So I'm basically seeing a projection. So I'm not seeing the board. I can feel it, same thing's happening there. I can lick it and taste it, same thing's happening there. I have conceptual models in my mind that I'm referring to, but they're still presentations to the mind. So I have no way of like passing through those filters to know this directly. Likewise with all the people in the room, I have no way of telling that this isn't like a matrix simulation, that you're actually there. The only way I know you're there is because I see you, I hear you, I smell you, you know, I'm referring to all my internal senses to know you're there. There's a big leap of faith needed to assume the outside world is there, but mostly it's just because of an agency thing. I try to make Tristan sit up and he doesn't do it, you know? So it's like, okay, he must be outside me because he doesn't follow my conscious commands. That's a little bit of a weird way of yes, it worked. Yes, okay, that is kind of one way we could determine inside and outside, but even inside to me, there's plenty of things that are not following my commands at all. A great deal of the mind, of our thinking, most of it just presents itself and it's like this onslaught of thoughts. And a lot of the bodily sensations, the five senses, also just present themselves to me, and I can't really manipulate my vision too much. I can kind of point it, I can control it for a moment, but I can't really, keep it controlled. I definitely can't keep my attention where I want to keep it. Otherwise, I could just put my attention on the chair and leave it there forever, and I'd never get distracted. So a lot of the stuff we think is in our control isn't in our control. But certainly, for sure, the outside world, I don't have direct access to. When we're dealing with patients, this is a very, very interesting thing to understand. You are never, ever, ever dealing directly with the patient. You are only ever dealing with your filters with the patient. So keeping this in mind is a very key thing. And your filters are always, no matter how much work you've done, stained by your mind, by your mental perceptions. They are changed, moved by your belief structures, by your ingrained habits, by so many things, by lots of movements in the unconscious, kind of playing with this and our perception of it. So we'll come back to how to use this, but this is a really, really key point.
Is there an idea that we can get closer to something being a truth?
We can get more direct to perception.
To what is?
Yeah, so for example, at the moment, I can refer to my vision just directly and perceive my vision stuff, and that's truth. I'm perceiving that stuff for sure. But within that vision, that you're Jamie and that's a chair, and that's all conjecture and abstraction, and actually that's just referring to mind. That's referring to abstraction and knowledge and thoughts and these insubstantial parts. So it's not direct referral to vision. In direct referral to vision, there's vision and silence and nothing else. What we tend to have is something like our consciousness looking at something in our mind, abstract notions, knowledge, information, and that is looking at the body, and that is looking at outside. So we have this kind of chain that's a little bit distorted. The idea of Qigong is to get this to go into this, so that then here we just have one point of contact rather than two. We're trying to melt the energy used in the mind into the body, which we'll get into today. Once we are in the body, things happen. You get a lot of what we call phenomena. Most people refer to this as energetics, but for the most part, the phenomena that appear are the result of energetic circulation having a friction with our closed and tight and jammed body, and as soon as the body opens up, a lot of the phenomena fall away. So it's natural that they arise, but they'll also pass and things also return to a more subtle state. We also end up having a sense organ that can more directly contact the external world than the mind can. And that gives us a great apparatus with which to interact with the outside world. So this is what we're going to look at, how to get the mind to merge into the body so I can use the body and trust the intelligence of the body to help me in my practice, in my treatments, and in my day-to-day life. To do this, we need to understand a few yin-yang spectrums, which I've put on the board here. We'll start with the body because it's more apparent. With the body and with our alignment, we can look at two possible spectrums. On this side is the spectrum that we call open, more like spread out. If I take my hand and I spread the tissue out, I spread the bones apart, I spread the fingers apart, I try and get the fingers spread long ways too, and I try and put as much space as I can. Yes, everything gets open and spread out, but at some point it gets very stiff. When the hand is really like being pushed to an extreme of open, it gets very stiff, it's very difficult to move things. So if I take my posture and I open it as much as I can, it becomes rigid at some point. On the other end of the spectrum, if I just release my hand, it's collapsed, it has no structure, it's floppy, it's loose, it has no oomph behind it, you know, it can't really do much, you know. I've got this useless thing because it's got no structure. So we don't want to be too released, we don't want to be too open. The center, the balance point, is a meeting of the two. I open my hand, but I release all of the tension I can feel, and then I open it a bit more, and then I release a bit more, and I open, release, and open, release, and open, release, and open, release, and I can continue that process, and slowly but surely everything gets further apart, but everything gets more relaxed as well. You can think of the fibers, oh, I threw all my pens away, that was stupid. You can think of the fibers being, you know, between 2 points, like very open, right, between two joints, where there's kind of space this way between all the muscular fibers. We also want between two joints to have space this way as well. Of course, if I force it, I just end up too far down this end, and if I release it, I just end up floppy. So we're really looking for this opening and releasing midpoint. To find that point, we want to hit a really particular zone which moves. As I spread my hand out, if I'm paying attention, at some point I'll start to notice the appearance of resistance, of something preventing my hand spreading out. It can be like a light stretch, it could be a tendon pulling. Something is stopping me being able to infinitely open my hand to fill the room. If I go slow enough, I can feel that thing appear in my awareness. I go from not being able to feel any tension in my hand, oh, it's nice and loose and nice and floppy, to actually starting to feel some sort of resistance. If I then stop on that precipice and release that resistance, but don't let the structure collapse, and that resistance releases, I can keep opening a little bit more until there's a bit more. And I can repeat that process constantly. If I notice there's no resistance, I can open more. And if I notice there's too much resistance, I can release the resistance. Either way, the result is the same. If I release the resistance, my hand can open more because there's nothing in the way. And if there's no resistance, my hand can open more because there's nothing in the way, right? So both times I'm looking for an opening, but I'm not looking for an opening that makes things rigid. I'm looking for an opening that is easeful, and that's this point. To aid that, we are going to look at how the mind works, because this plays a role in the same way. If my mind is too released, I drop into a kind of wandering, you know, I want to pay attention to my hand to do this task, but I release my mind and I'm just like, oh yeah, you know, House of the Dragons last night was pretty cool. And I've got this stuff to do this weekend and that stuff to do that weekend. And I end up with essentially the mind version of this, right? The mind collapses and just ends up doing whatever, busting all the pens because it's not, not being controlled very well. It's just completely doing something. On this end, and it's where a lot of people end up when they learn how to help themselves, is things become too forced, too controlling, too much intent involved where you're trying way, way, way too hard. And that brings in a kind of mental tension where you're like, "Oh, I'm trying to relax, you know, and it's counterproductive to what we're doing. The sweet spot in between is this attentive listening, where we put our attention on a spot, we keep it there, which is kind of the intent part of it, but we don't tell that spot how it should be. So say I go back to my hand again, I just put my attention on my hand, and if there's pain there, I pay attention to the pain. If there's no pain there, I pay attention to the tingling. If there's a wonderful sensation, I pay attention to that. And if it falls away, I pay attention to what comes in its place, right? The listening idea suggests that I kind of let it come to me. I don't go and seize something. I don't really go and look for something in particular. I look in a particular area, for sure, because I want to be able to put my attention on my hand or my neck or whatever, the patient, something like this. But I don't want to have an idea of what I'm meant to find, just the zone in which I'm looking. So we become more like an explorer than a person who already knows what we're going to find and, you know, confirms my bias by touching the person and going, oh, that's rigid. An interesting thing happens when we give something attention without any of this, without agenda, without an idea of how it's meant to be. Because if I'm giving something, say my body, my own body, attention, but I have an agenda, there's pain there, but there shouldn't be pain there, I'm going to do something to get rid of that pain, then I'm still doing this, right? I'm still referring to an idea about the area before referring to the area. The more I release that, the more I can directly refer to the area, then I just listen to how it is. The tough part of this is that we have to accept the good and the bad. If I start listening to an area and it's really, really not fun and uncomfortable, I've got to release every single idea I have about how it should be. Get out of this controlling side of the mind and just let it be as it is. If we can find that point, you will find that the thing you're paying attention to evolves on its own. It starts to automatically arrange itself. It starts to automatically organize itself as if this were a fuel source and whatever it got pointed at grows, evolves on its own. Again, the big issue here is that this is often pointing at this first. And so it makes our ideas and thoughts about the thing grow and evolve. Oh, it's like this, it's like that. Oh, now it's definitely, yep, I've got it now. And we miss this direct contact with the more yin aspect. Here, the yin and yang theory is really interesting, right? Because the yang is the moving, the yin is the material. And if we want the material to become animated, we need the yang consciousness to penetrate within the yin material. If we have yang consciousness pointed at yang mind, it'll just turn the mind, and the mind will change at light speed and we'll get no rest. But if we can make the yang go into the yin, then the yin will actually evolve. So we'll end up with our problems, our weaknesses, our tensions, our stress evolving on its own without me having to do anything. And the really odd thing is the less you do, the better it works, as long as the attention stays in place and you hit this sweet spot. When I'm using these processes in a treatment, there are two sides of it, because one, I want to be taking care of myself. If I'm here and I'm on the rigid side of things, really forcing stuff, yeah, you'll exhaust yourself. If I'm too released, I can't actually lift the person up and manipulate them, you know, I can't do stuff. If I can hit this sweet spot, while I'm moving the person around, I'm training, essentially. I'm getting better at this. I'm giving my body room to organize under load, and every time I treat, it's like I've gone and done training on my own, but there just happens to be a person there. And then, you know, training's not always hyper nourishing. Sometimes it can be a little confronting where you meet your demons and whatever nasty stuff's inside. But afterwards, it's always nicer. You know, whatever period of digestion you have where you meet something, it can be a little gnarly, but afterwards it's always nice. This brings me kind of back to this thing. And there is a concept that shows up in a lot of spirituality, in a lot of religious systems too, which basically says everything's one, everything's the same. As within, so without, as above, so below. What this means for me is that if I have a patient that has a particular problem and I am not connected with the part of myself that has that same problem, then that patient's going to trigger me. It's going to remind me of the part of myself I'm not in contact with. And if I don't want to be in contact with that part, I'm going to fight that. And that fight is going to spend a lot of energy, and I'm going to feel sick or run down or whatever. And it's going to feel like I took on the person's stuff. My view is this hasn't happened at all. You've just reminded you of your own stuff that you're not in contact with and gone to war with yourself. Qigong will slowly take us through our body and through our deep psychology and all of this and confront you to it until you have no choice to be like, oh, I'm like that too. Oh, right, I'm like that too. And slowly but surely as you develop this, you go through every part of your system, you realize you have all the same patterns as everyone else. They express in different ways, sure, but those patterns exist. If the pattern isn't expressing right now, the potential for it is there. And the more you go inwards, the more you connect to yourself in a very deep way, the less and less and less you'll be triggered by how other people act, by how other people are, because you'll see they're just like you. And there'll be a lot of empathy that comes up instead, going, I know what it's like to be like that. I've been there to some degree. I recognize that, you know. Then it comes down to an act of recognition. Do I recognize as without, so as within, so without? Do I recognize the part of myself that's like the thing I'm seeing? And by essence of that, the internal and the external, the essence of that thing can be recognized. With direct recognition, again, the thing evolves on its own and it finds a place to settle and it sorts itself out. As soon as I'm referring to it indirectly, that's stupid and shouldn't be there, then, you know, you go into this kind of controlling, which can work, but often when we control things, it doesn't nearly work as well as when we let them do themselves. A really good example of this is learning to drive a car. When I'm first learning to drive a car and I'm hyper conscious of everything, I'm down here learning, foot on the clutch, turn the thing, accelerate while pulling the, oh, where's the car? I've got to indicate while I'm doing, there's like 10,000 things going on. It ends up being a bit like, and it's actually only once we release that control and let the unconscious do it, that you start driving smoothly. And of course, there's always opportunities to tidy that up because the conscious mind has a role of revealing something new. It's more opening, right? It can open to go, hey, you're missing this little bit. Then that can be integrated and so on and so forth. But we basically want to get to that same mode of driving, you know, where I can completely check out but drive across town and somehow navigate traffic, and I've just been like in la la land, or really engaged with my podcast and haven't at all paid attention to the driving. Because the unconscious has a serious capacity to do a lot of stuff way better than the conscious mind. But if I just let the unconscious do its thing without attention, the conscious part, it kind of just finds its routine and then it'll just repeat that routine until the end of time. The attention gives it the possibility of adjusting to the circumstances. So we need to learn to pay attention to what we're doing without controlling what we're doing, which is a very difficult task because a lot of the control that's going on we don't know about. We don't even realize that there's this little agenda coming along with our attention going, nothing's stupid, it shouldn't be like that, you know. So this is part of the process of Qigong, is revealing all of this and learning to get into this process where I'm perpetually attentive to what is and being attentive to what is, but being released of any idea that it should be other than it is, it evolves on its own. If that process is followed through on the bodily level, we'll slowly open our body will slowly release itself, it will slowly reorganize itself, it will get better and better and better at doing that. Even cooler, at one point the unconscious gets a grip on this process and we'll just start doing it while you're like sitting here talking to a bunch of people in a room, which is really nice, standing in line. Doing a treatment, you don't have to consciously make it happen at some point. To a degree, you've got to learn to do it, but at some point it'll turn a threshold.
There's something in, I don't know, something like prayer or like intention, but in a way of like embracing the vastness of what we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
that can set something in motion in that way.
Absolutely.
Quickly,
Yes. Yeah. Sure. This is kind of a bit of like here going straight to here, which is works, but it has a bunch of parameters around which it works too. The only issue with that is it can be done without ever entering the body. And so whenever I'm using things like visualizations to learn about my body, I'm actually making a kind of roundabout reference point. I'm going into my mind, into a structure I've created in my imaginal landscape, to use that structure to refer to my body. So I'm indirectly communicating with my body as if it were an external agent. And a lot of stuff can be done through that. You can use visualizations to connect with all parts of your body and give them instructions and give them ideas and help them, but you never merge with it. With Neigong, you actually, the mind comes into the body, which we'll see pretty quickly today, and you've seen a bit of already.
Sorry, yeah.
You've seen a bit of it already in class, right? It's a very, very different action, and whenever we're in the mind, we're in the yang, and it's unstable. The yin is the part that has the stability. The yin is the part that anchors us. So if we want to be anchored and stable, and yin is nourishing and yang is expending, right? So no amount of visualization can really nourish me. It can be used to tidy me up. So if I think of it like money, I can organize all my spending so it's more efficient. You can do that with visualizations for sure, but you can never gain more. Whereas as soon as you start making contact inside the body, you'll start building your reserves. Cool. Any questions so far about the big word spew I just sent your way to get the basic theory?
You said with the two sides of the coin in treatment, like one being the focus on yourself,
yes.
the second side of the coin?
It's the same with the patient. Then if I can, the better I can look at myself without expectations, the better I'll be able to look at my patient. And then I can just, feel them, and we'll directly experience this today. The more I can release into myself, the more I can feel into my patient. And then I can feel them, and I don't tell the stuff I feel what to do at all. I just feel it, and it starts sorting itself out in the same way I do internally, unless I want to put intent in there and mess with it, which we do in martial arts and push hands and stuff, but not so much in treatment where you're wanting them to get better, right? Yeah, so as within, so without. If I want to be able to directly look at a patient with no expectations, I need to be able to directly look at myself with no expectations. It doesn't work one-sided at all. If you think it's working only outside and not inside, you've just got a hidden agenda there that's playing its part. The other nice thing about the Neigong is it's a reality check that you can't kid yourself about. There's just no chance of getting in a airy fluff about. You go in, you go, uh-oh, and then you have to deal with those relationships and get better with those relationships and practice being able to pay attention to those really, really difficult things. The cool thing is with practice, it actually gets better and you have a way of testing that. So that's one there's the light and the dark that comes with this kind of practice. It is not at all a feel-good practice. Often,
You say that though, that afterwards you feel better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The light is after the dark usually. The old Chinese saying is you've got to eat bitter before you can taste sweet. So the confrontation, oh God, I'm like that. Okay, I'm like that. And then it releases, and oh, that's pretty nice. Accepting myself for how I am and in my imperfections, then it feels better, right? So yeah, usually the nice thing comes after, but the practice itself can, as you know, be quite grueling. It's not at all like a, go and just feel the airy, floaty thing, which is nice, but doesn't produce this effect. Yeah, and as a result of that, it has to necessarily take time. If I were to get you now and just shove you in your body somehow and just open you to every single horrible blockage that's in there, you'd just go and probably just spontaneously combust and die or something like this. It necessarily has to take time because you need to digest what you run into and you need to establish a new relationship with something that you didn't know about before. Like any relationship, it can't be fast forwarded. You can't fast forward any relationship at all, whether it's with yourself or other people. Let's learn what to do about it, the actual practices. I will show you the practice now. Just watch and take notes, and then we'll spread out through all the rooms and try for ourselves, and I'll come around and give you guys tips and corrections and things like this. The main idea is that we want to find a place where this is easily accessible, and this being between yang and yin, being more centered, works best when the system is more centered physically, which means I'm between extremes. So from the ground up, too close together, too far apart. What's in between? It's about shoulder width. Too turned in, too turned out. In between is feet straight ahead. The knees, too straight, too bent. I need to be in between where I'm kind of bent but not bent. With the knees and the feet, it gives me a weight relationship. The upper body also plays a role in this too. But if I have my weight forward on my toes, back on my heels, outside on the blade of my foot, or inside on the inside of my foot, you see what it does to my knees. It kind of moves them around. I'm looking to get right in the center where I don't have more weight inside, outside, front, back, left, right, anything like this. Moving up, the hips really want to be open through here, through this region, spreading out so the weight can drain into the deep hip. This is a region in the internal martial arts called the Qua, or it's a Mandarin word that just means the groin basically. But it's the deep hip in here that we're really, really interested in. This region is very, very locked up in 99.9% of people due to sitting habits of the modern world. So it takes a bit of work to free it up, but it's well worth the effort. And there'll be a whole bunch of carry-on effects to the knees and the lower back and all over the system if you put that effort in. So it's well worth investing the time. The hips themselves, we don't want to tuck, we don't want to untuck, we don't want to place at all, because anytime we try and place, we'll actually end up controlling and rigid. I need release in there. I need a capacity to just sink, where I let go of the hips and let them fall. And this will work better the more space there is, the more open I am, right? So I need a capacity to open. There's two joints here, the sacroiliac joints, that need to spread out and open, and that gives the possibility of sinking through the Qua. Next, we have the soft tissue. All of this needs to be opened and released. So if I am open through the back but collapse through the front, it's no good because I end up like Mr. Burns. If I'm open through the front but collapse through the back, I get the duck bum. I need both the front and back to open evenly, and this will only work to the degree that the Qua is available. Moving up to the chest, we have the chest and the shoulders in a relationship, kind of like clamps, and the hips work a bit like this too, right? If the musculature around the hips clamps the pelvis, then I can't release the pelvis. So they need to relax and open so the pelvis can drop. It's the same with the shoulders. If the shoulders clamp the chest, I can't do much with the chest. I need to relax and open the shoulders so the chest can sink. And I want the back to sink as well, so the shoulder blades to drop down with the same degree of sinking as the front has. The arms themselves, you just want them to hang as if they were just heavy dead weights, falling out of the arm, the shoulder, hanging down as if the elbow was really heavy, and having this feeling like gravity is spacing all the joints, all the way down through to the hands, to the fingernails. And I want the same effect through the neck. I can't be too military because it lifts my chest, which I wanted sunk. If I just sink the chest, I get the computer neck. I want somewhere in between where I can sink but elevate the head at the same time and open all the way around the neck. If this is done well, there's a few more cues for the head too. Let's include them now. One of the things that can be really nice to focus on is the TMJ, the jaw joint. If you just think of this like a little crank that opens the back of the neck, like you're winding up, that can be a really useful way, and that will also set the jaw. So your jaw is not open. It'll bring a nice relaxed setting to the jaw. And the classic cue of raising through the crown and tucking the chin gently also works nicely. The idea is to get opening and releasing system-wide. Find everywhere in the body that's collapsed and open it, everywhere in the body that's tense and release it, and I want to have this go through the whole system. All the cues are pointing to that. If you find that without one of the cues or use a different cue to find it, it's not a problem at all. We're trying to get to an essence here. We're not trying to say my set of cues is the best set of cues. Sometimes you'll hear one cue and you're like, oh, it's like that, and your system opens and releases, and it's a good cue then. You want to stand here and take your mind through each part of the body, looking for anywhere that's collapsed. You open the collapse. Anywhere that's tight, you release the tension, and you just move your mind through your body. We won't worry too much about this yet. For now, we're kind of artificially forcing the opening and release just to get a feeling of what it feels like. As you get all the way through, you can go to the top and then you can work your way down. From bottom to top, from top to bottom, both work. You can play around with which one works better for you. Personally, I've been quite enjoying going from top down because gravity also goes this way, so that feels to me really nice, but I've been taught in both ways and they both work reasonably well. Then we just stand and we endure, and anything that comes up that's burning, leave it. The only thing you don't want is joint pain. If the joints are pained, it means you've got a collapse or a tension somewhere that's tweaking a joint, and we've got to play with your alignment a bit more. Cool. Burning muscles, endure. Get used to paying attention to difficult stuff because it'll be useful later.
And by endure, do you mean just be aware of the whole body or continue the process?
Just continue the process. Yeah, anything that's burning, leave it in the periphery. Leave it as background noise, like the cars passing at the moment. Might be very loud background noise, but you want to leave it. Cool. So get this going and then we'll look at the next step. Find some space around here. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more or support my work, head on over to my website, craigmallet.com. You're also welcome to join my community, which can be found at community.craigmallet.com or via the menu on my main website. I generally have a number of services available. If you'd like some help, just reach out. I have a student program, I have online courses, I have workshops and private consultations, all available to any who would want it. As always, to appease the algorithm gods, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and/or share.